Hey, what is going on, guys? Recently, Project Flux has launched, and this has created a very interesting situation where Nexus and Flux are both running a very similar game. So in today's video, I'm going to try and point out the key differences between the two and help you decide which project might be right for you. Now, as always, I'm not going to make a blanket statement saying one is always better than the other, because while they're similar, they do have some differences, and depending on what you're looking for, I don't think one is always better than the other. So hopefully I'm going to help you decide which one's better today. So we're going to play some Project Flux gameplay for the first half of the video, and then I'll switch over to Project Nexus for the second half so you can see a bit of both. First thing we're going to do is briefly look at the similarities between the projects. We'll then talk about Flux's advantages, then the advantages of Nexus. We'll then talk about Tossup Points that you could give the advantage either way depending on what you're looking for. And then finally, I'll have my conclusion, and this will be time-stamped as always. And with that, let's start out with the similarities. They're both run Chapter 1, Season 8, which is 8.51, and they play very similar in a lot of ways. Their settings menus are almost identical. Their maps are practically identical. The cosmetic items available are almost identical. It's just very, very similar in the way that games play. They also are both similar difficulty. I'd say they're both medium difficulty projects. They're not like ECFN where it's pretty easy, but they're not like other projects where it's super hard, just in the middle there. And they both have very similar queue systems. Neither of them can you see a public player count, but generally the queue is pretty reliable, pretty fast, and you don't spend 20 minutes trying to get into a game. Okay, let's go over the advantages of Flux. Okay, so the first advantage of Flux is that there are more things working inside the game. So ballers exist, infantry rifles exist, and the vending machines work. None of those features are available in Nexus. Before, the gap was actually wider as Nexus didn't have the boom bow, flint knock pistol, or the power cannons working either, but those have been added in fairly recently. Overall, still though, if you really like the baller, for instance, that's your favorite thing to use, well then you're going to want to play Flux, because the Nexus, it could come later, but it's not clear when or even if that will happen. So if those are items you really want to use, you're going to want to play Flux. And overall, I think this is a good thing, because none of these items are particularly overpowered and busted, nor are they completely useless. And I think that's great, because it just gives you more things to play around with, and overall, if that's what you're looking for, Flux is probably the better choice for you. Next, Flux does support NA servers, particularly if you want to play NA solo. This is going to be really important, as you might just physically live too far from the EU server to have playable games. Now, on duos, you can pretty much play EU pretty well, even a high ping, provided you have a good teammate to make up for that. But on solos, you're relying just on yourself. So if you like to play NA, it's there for you on Flux. Nexus, I haven't heard any plans to add NA at the moment, so really Flux is the only option there if you need to play NA. And finally, Flux has normal solos readily available pretty much all the time, while Nexus really doesn't. Nexus currently offers late game solos, but that's not quite the same, and they have offered arena solos, but only briefly. If you really like to play solos, that's your favorite game mode, then I'd go with Flux, as it's always available. And generally in solos, you're going to get the most players in the solo game mode against the other ones on Flux, so that's where you want to go if solos is your thing. Okay, let's move on to the key advantages of Nexus. First off, if you like to play duos and just team modes in general, Nexus is definitely the better choice there, because although Flux does support team modes, they generally don't have a lot of people. You're going to be lucky to get 30 people at most on duos on Flux, while on Nexus you can easily pull 80 plus, and the reason for that is just because duos is their primary mode. Yes, they have late game solos, but most of the people are playing duos, and that's where it's going to be at. They also occasionally will disable duos and run squads. Hasn't happened in like 3 weeks or so, but when it does happen, squads has very good player counts. So if team modes is your thing, I definitely go with Nexus. Second thing is, I generally notice there's less cheating going around in Nexus. There's less hacking, there's less aimbotting. Does it still exist in Nexus? Yes. But at the moment, from what I've experienced and the people I've talked to, the cheating issue is a lot less bad on Nexus. So if you really get bothered by that, I highly recommend going with Nexus. Finally, they're also more willing to disable game modes to improve player counts. This is something that I really wanted Flux and previously Era to do, but they just never do, is disable modes when there's not enough players. Because, Flux Duos doesn't have enough people, and it never will as long as you have solo, duo, and squad, and particularly with NA as well. While on Nexus, you have EU only and 2 game modes, duos and late game solos. And what that does is just give you more players most of the time. And that's great. If they're added squads, there's a good chance duos will be temporarily disabled. So if you're looking for the highest player counts across the modes that are available, I'd go with Nexus there. Flux can improve on this if they start disabling modes, but they haven't really done that as of yet. Now, let's move into the toss-up points, where you could really make a case for either one being better. First off, it's the progression system. Both of them are item shop based, But with Nexus, you're going to get V-Bucks a lot faster. You can pretty much just get V-Bucks from just playing the game. You don't have to look at challenges or anything. If you just play, over time, you'll accumulate a massive amount of V-Bucks. I think right now I have 70,000, and it's not really even from an active effort of trying to get them. It just sort of happens. So, you know, if you're the type of person that just wants to play and get V-Bucks quickly, Nexus is the better choice there. But on Flux, the V-Bucks accumulation rate is slower, and you primarily get them through challenges. So if challenges is what you really want to do, you want to have to grind for things, well, then Flux might be the better choice there. Really, I'd say, you know, for Flux, it's challenges and you can get some of the stuff you want, while Nexus is basically just play the game and you can get the vast majority of stuff you want. Okay, in terms of bugs, really, I think it's 50-50. There's bugs in both, and they're different bugs as well. Off the top of my head, in Nexus, you can get 20 shield off of mushrooms because they glitch out. Same thing for apples. You can't use traps after you pick up a treasure map. You get weapons from tables and literal floor pieces occasionally. Well, in Flux, the issues I can think of is the lobby freezes when someone joins. I also find the issue where your duo is offline. Everyone shows offline to refriend them. I have that more often on Flux. There's issues on both projects. Overall, I'd probably say Flux is slightly less buggy, but honestly, both of them have issues. It's just kind of luck of the draw whether you're going to run into more issues on either one. I don't think any of the issues are completely game-ruining experiences, but just keep in mind that on both you're going to have different problems. If one of those bugs really bothers you, like for some reason you can't stand that you can't use traps after treasure maps, well then maybe you go Flux. Or you can't stand that the lobby freezes after someone joins, then go Nexus. Finally, in terms of their future outlook, they're looking at different seasons for the future. Flux plans to go to Season 9 next, while Nexus plans to go to Chapter 2, Season 2. Basically, it's just decide which season sounds more appealing to you, and then something to keep in mind there. They don't sound like they're going to be coming out to new seasons in the immediate future, but it is planned to come at some point. Okay, with that, let's wrap up here and kind of talk about which project I recommend you go for, depending on what you're looking for. First off, with Flux, if you really like solos, and especially if you want to play NA solos, then Flux is really a choice for you. Nexus is really not a great project for solos. They don't run it that often, and they only have EU. And really with solos, ping is more important than in team modes. And with team modes, you can play support, you know, use L2, things like that, snipe, but in solos, you just have to be able to do those build fights and box fights, and really Flux is going to be a better choice because there's solos and there's also NA. In addition, if you like grinding for things, you need to have that sense of progression, go Flux. Flux has challenges that generally work pretty well. Nexus doesn't really have that. So if that's something you're looking for, then I'd go Flux. For Nexus, I'd go Nexus if you want to play duos and just team modes in general. While Flux does support them, the player counts generally aren't very good, while Nexus duo player counts are sky high, and when they run squads, it was also very good. So definitely go Nexus if you want to play team modes. And also, if you just want to get more stuff in general, you don't care about challenges, you just want to accumulate things quicker, then Nexus might also be the better choice. And finally, as things stand, I find the cheating to be less bad on Nexus. So if you're running into a lot of cheating on Flux, you probably may want to switch over to Nexus. If you're 50-50, maybe you go Nexus because of the cheating issue. But that could change pretty quickly depending on an anti-cheat update, but just something to keep in mind there. And with that, I hope this video was helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one.